2021, right? Yeah, it was just like one great thing after the next. I don't know. Obviously, surgery was the big one. I've been wanting it forever, 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 my whole life. And then when it happened, it blew all my expectations out of the water. Even the nurses were surprised how well I was like healing, adjusting, coping. It was great. My self-esteem was like through the roof that year. Also, that Mogai video, remember that one? Yeah, that video was on like everyone's homepage that winter. It was getting like crazy, ridiculous numbers for whatever reason. And I was getting really sick of my job, and it seemed like all these people on the internet were really nice. So I just said screw it, and I quit my job, and I tried to do the video thing full time. Obviously, wasn't making that much money at that point, but like Vic had just gotten this kind of like nice raise at work, so it felt like everything lined up. Yeah, no, that was that summer. I think it came out in May here. So I got my first dose in June, and everyone else in my life sort of did too. And pretty quickly, stuff just felt like safe again. I was seeing friends that I hadn't seen in like years, and it was my 22nd birthday. It would have been. We just had, I don't know, like 30 people in this house. Huge, like vibes unmatched. I mean, you know me. It's never been easy for me. Nothing is ever. But after surgery, things just fell into place, I guess. Like, I was just totally confident and assured in my path. It was like the first year of my life that things really made sense.
What happened next?
So then, so I was at lunch with Hannah, and we were catching up. I was telling her how awesome my life was going. And just as we're packing up to leave, I got a call from Vic saying that they've lost their job. Just like a corporate restructuring, layoffs, whatever kind of nonsense. And it wasn't a huge deal. Honestly, I think they really enjoyed the time off anyway. But that new apartment sure was expensive.
What happened next?
Then it was Omicron, which pretty much blindsided me, I guess. I had been working really hard to finish this video in December. And once it came out, I realized I had been tuning everything out, and that COVID had actually gotten like really, really bad in the past few weeks. So we didn't see our families over that holiday, and I spent most of the winter like just totally cooped up inside. So this is also when I start smoking again, which was stupid.
What happened next?
I don't really know. The doctors never like figured out what went wrong exactly. All I know is like in January, February, I started having these weird, painful complications. And so I had to go in for appointments every couple weeks, like forever. It was really painful and uncomfortable. I still don't know if it was my fault.
What happens next?
What Happens Next is a webcomic by Max Graves that I discovered this past summer and promptly devoured in one sitting. It tells the story of a young trans man named Milo, who several years earlier was found to be an accomplice in the murder of a young woman, a friend of his named Haley. Haley was only 16 when she was killed, and Milo was 15, same as the actual killer, another trans man named Griffin. The comic starts up 8 years later, well after the dust on the case has settled. Griffin is doing 40 to life in a women's prison. Milo has just recently been released from psychiatric confinement, and he's living in basically total isolation at his grandmother's house. The start of the comic finds Milo spending all of his time on pastel aesthetic Tumblr, customizing Furbies to sell online, and weathering what's basically an internet cancellation.
Yeah, I remember that case. It was a big media thing because they were both, 14?
15, I think. And there were those cosplay photos they took holding knives, which, for the record, I think is normal. But, it scares suburban moms.
I had no idea that one of them is just out there in the world, though, and he's, online?
Yeah, he has a Tumblr. People send him anon hate about the murder.
Given such a scandalous set of details, Haley's murder was unsurprisingly heavily publicized. All these years later, it's still the focus of sociopathic Kiwi Farms threads, retellings on true crime blogs, and trashy YouTube videos treating the whole affair like influencer drama. In the context of the internet milking these tragedies for all they've got, What Happens Next makes some pretty radical choices. Despite ostensibly being about a murder, 2 years into the comic's run, it's still unclear exactly what happened that day, how culpable Milo really is. Our access to the murder is fragmented and incomplete. We only hear about it in third-hand retellings or see it in brief PTSD-like flashes. The comic steers almost entirely clear of those aspects of a crime we tend to fixate on, the grisly details, the court proceedings. Instead, it picks up well after most stories would have ended and forces us to consider, well, what happens next?
I mean, you do understand why people are mad at you, right?
I know I did something horrible, but it's not like I can take it back. I was 15. I still have to live the entire rest of my life. What am I supposed to do?
Like, it's an especially interesting question when it comes to, like, victims of crime and when it comes to perpetrators of crime, because I feel like so often in popular culture, it's like the ending is like, well, they got caught and they went to prison, the end. The person, you know, at fault was punished, and like now the victim can kind of like rest easy. And it's like, well, that's like a woefully incomplete narrative, because obviously, like, the people that, you know, those things happen to in reality, like, they continue to have lives, they continue to exist. It's like, what do you do with yourself, actually, like, after you've done something like that? Because I think what Milo struggles with is this feeling that, like, everybody around him just kind of, like, wants him to disappear, or, like, everybody wants him to no longer be a factor. But, like, he doesn't want to do that. Like, he wants to be able to live his life.
From the public's perspective, when Milo is released at age 20, the story is over. He and Griffin did a bad thing, they were caught and sentenced, and now, thanks to the endless mercy of the American justice system, Milo is a free man with a second chance at life. But while it's been nearly a decade since Haley was killed, that only leaves Milo at the age of 23. As a young adult, Milo's prospects are not great. I mean, he spent most of his teenage years and half of his adult ones in forced confinement. As a result, he's never held down a job, and I don't think he even started high school. Having missed out on 5 years of crucial development, the Milo we come to know is severely stunted. You can tell just taking one look at the guy. He's adopted this really soft, childish personal style, and all of his teenage hobbies are perfectly intact. He's also psychologically fixated on the past, constantly revisiting the day of Haley's death, and continuing to dream as a teenage girl. The people in Milo's life want him to move on, and I get it. His immaturity makes him hard to deal with. But honestly, what do you want the guy to do? No business wants to hire a 23-year-old murder accomplice with no work experience. No landlord will rent to someone without savings or income. And while many of us on the left believe abstractly that people deserve community, when it comes to people like Milo, we're hardly tripping over each other to volunteer. While Milo is no longer being physically detained, the fact of his incarceration has marked him permanently and dictated what kind of person he can readily become. The same is true 10 times over for people who are more oppressed than Milo, a rich white kid with a lawyer for a mother. The kind of oppression he faces after being released is hard to name or point a finger at. After all, it's not like he's been banned from being independent, it's just been made exceptionally difficult. Milo's continued struggles can basically be, and have been, chalked up to personal weakness. People keep telling Milo to take accountability for his actions, but his culture's primary path to doing that is incarceration, and that's already happened. From his vantage point, what could accountability even look like? He's not in a position to make amends with Haley's family, not least because the murder radicalized her sister into a TERF. If we simply want him to own up to the harm he caused, to me that doesn't feel realistic as long as he's in defense mode, fighting to stay alive.
This is sort of like the question at the heart of, like, you know, like, prison abolition as a politics is like, okay, but what is the alternative to prison? What is the alternative to carceral and punitive justice? You know, I would hope that, like, that, you know, an offender like Milo who, like, committed a crime as a young person could be presented with, like, these are the things that you need to do to, like, re-enter society. Like, these are the things that we need to keep an eye on. I guess, like, you don't necessarily have to, like, lock someone up and, like, isolate them completely from the normal world. As opposed to just being like, is this person, like, receiving treatment that they need? Is this person in a situation that is conducive to them not reoffending? Is this person, like, what is, like, their life path going to look like? And, like, I think that we do have the tools to do those things societally to sort of, like, I guess, like, more, like, keep an eye on people and be like, yeah, like, what's happening in this person's life?
I realize this is a pretty uncomfortable premise for a story. following a murder accomplice who's not an especially good person and not really working on it either. We much prefer not to think about people in Milo's position. We think people like him should rot in prison forever. On some level, that's the only solution that offers peace of mind. Prisons give us permission to forget about people. We all know incarceration doesn't prevent violence. What it does is create a second class of citizen who we deem deserving of whatever violence comes their way. Everybody around Milo expects him to move on, but the society he lives in is based on the idea that once you break the rules, nobody should care what the rest of your life looks like. The horror of Milo's situation is that he's living out a story that everyone around him insists has already ended. And thus, he needs to figure out how to live a life for which no blueprint exists. Well into his 20s, and on his millionth friendship as Magic rewatch, all of Milo's days echo his teen years. He's unable to learn anything from them because nothing new will ever happen there again. What happens next is a ghost story about the living.
It was awful.
Yeah, damn, but hey, at least it's over now.
I guess it doesn't really feel like it's over a lot of the time. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still there.
Rewatching Bo Burnham's Inside in 2023 is a hard experience to put into words. 2 years out from its release at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, there's undeniably still a lot to love in the special. The songs are probably the best Burnham's ever written, and the camera work and the lighting are a genuine visual marvel, even though the special was shot entirely in one room. None of this has changed since the special released, but one thing that has is the jokes just aren't that funny anymore. I mean, the highs are high, but for every welcome to the internet, you get a song about how FaceTiming is awkward. For every how the world works, you get a jab at Bo's white savior complex. It's just stuff we've all heard so many times by now. Some of the sketches make me cringe, like looking back at old Facebook posts from high school, seeing myself commit so hard to a version of myself I know I dropped like 6 months later. Really though, none of this is fair game for criticism. The special is best enjoyed for what it is, an artifact from the first year of COVID, created not to be retrospected on, but for the people living through it then. Inside took the world by storm because it captured how it felt to live through that moment with remarkable honesty. Just like revisiting old Facebook posts, rewatching Inside gave me access to a version of myself I'd sort of siloed off, and gave me a chance to consider how much I've changed since then. Far beyond any cringe factor, the primary feeling I felt was nostalgia for early COVID. I'm embarrassed to say this out loud, but I can't be the only one who feels this way sometimes, right? The first wave of COVID was a terrible, violent time. I'm not saying I should feel nostalgic, but I do. Inside reminded me of something we had in those first couple of years, which I've sorely missed. A sense of, ironically, togetherness. When you think about it, it's kind of remarkable that such a deeply personal special resonated with so many people, despite the jokes about climate collapse and suicidal ideation. Hell, even the jokes I look back and cringe at, I only do so because we were literally all making them. For a good while there, when shit got real, everyone I knew shared the same concerns and the same drive. March 2020 was the most unified I've ever seen the world. I remember feeling that something huge was happening and that everyone would need to band together if we were going to make it through.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try.
To some extent, it was always just a story. We were only all stuck at home because the people with platforms and influence were stuck at home. And look, Inside was filmed in Bo Burnham's guest house. The dude probably had a cushier quarantine than any of us can imagine. Lots of people went on working outside their homes, in hospitals and meatpacking plants. My partner had an absolutely brutal first wave, pulling 50-hour weeks in a warehouse because so much shopping had moved online. And so there's probably something to be said about how we're all in this together was used to appease the people being put directly in harm's way. But even if we weren't going through the exact same thing, it was clear that we were experiencing something drastic and new. The whiplash between normal life and quarantine was so universally felt that just about everyone agreed we needed an organized response to get things under control. This is before lockdowns and vaccinations became a major wedge issue, at least here in Canada. My home province of Quebec was hit with COVID early and hard. We had over 4,800 people die in the first 3 months alone. In the early days of the pandemic, our provincial and federal governments introduced policies to reduce further deaths, including mask mandates and limits on outdoor gatherings. From what I remember, these policies went over pretty much fine. I mean, there was some backlash, but only way out on the fringes. I mean, thousands of lives were on the line. As Quebec reeled from our devastation, people all across the province started putting up these signs in their front windows. There were these little rainbows, sometimes printed, sometimes hand-drawn, with the caption, "Ça va bien aller." It's going to be okay. I can't overstate how ubiquitous these were. You'd see like 10 or 20 walking down a single block. I remember thinking they were corny, but, sweet. And eventually I came to believe them. Eventually it would be. Over the rest of that year, an alluring narrative took hold about how the pandemic would end. A vaccine would roll out, people would stop getting sick or dying, and finally the world would move on. In Quebec, COVID vaccines rolled out widely in May 2021 and were a massive, instant success. Everything I'd hoped for came to pass. By that fall, I was eating in restaurants, we were hosting parties inside. It was fantastic. And then stuff kept happening. Starting with Omicron in November of that year, new variants brought new surges, brought new deaths, making the path forward much less clear. It seemed like we'd done everything asked of us, but the virus didn't conform to any narrative we asked it to. This unbearable uncertainty bubbled up in me. What was I meant to look forward to at this point? What was I meant to believe about the future? Almost 2 years into the pandemic, with no end in sight, I remember driving past a hospital and noticing that the printed rainbows in the window had started to bleach in the sun. With each new wave after this point, the government's response grew quieter and quieter. And in the media, you started to hear more about learning to live with the virus, phasing out preventative measures, and leaving it up to individuals to make the right choices for themselves. This may have been framed as the will of the people, but at least in Canada, it wasn't. A healthy majority in every province supported mask mandates, even months after they had been lifted. By June of 2022, my province had lifted all remaining restrictions and ended the state of emergency declared 2 years earlier. Finally, the rainbows came down from the windows. For all intents and purposes, the pandemic was over. 2022 went on to be the worst year of COVID in Canada by literally any measure. More people got sick and more people died than in the shockwave that was 2020. In the time since precautions were lifted in Quebec, hospitalizations have only once dipped below March 2020 levels. By any reasonable measure, the crisis is ongoing, but out in the world, it definitely doesn't feel that way. These days, when I wear a mask in public, people regularly ask me why. Like, not even judgmentally, it's just, they don't know. It happens, I don't know, once or twice a week, and I never know how to answer without being rude. Like, my dude, things are roughly as bad right now as the first lockdown. If not for deaths, then at least for long-term disability. And I get frustrated and I want to blame them, but I understand their position because we have basically no centralized messaging about COVID nowadays. Quebec used to maintain websites with simple graphs that updated every day. Now, if you want a full account of what's going on, you have to download a spreadsheet and parse the data yourself, which is just not going to happen for most people. This obfuscation effort has meant that every individual is responsible for themselves, and the government isn't responsible for anything. Every new illness or death is considered a natural result of one's personal choices, and not the natural result of living in a society that's allowed the disease to spread. The whole situation reminds me of that one infamous Margaret Thatcher quote, "There is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women and their families." The supposed end to the pandemic hasn't done anything except rob us of the language needed to acknowledge what's happening. Now there's no need for social supports. Now we hear no reminders to treat ourselves gently or be kind to each other in these unprecedented times. If politicians are to be believed, our current times are actually so precedented, they're not even worth acknowledging. It's been sad watching the public follow their lead into this cultural blankness. Where's the inside for 2023? Hell, where's our fetch the bolt cutters? Certainly not in the zeitgeist like those were, but I'd argue there does exist defining music of this moment. Here's how you hear it. When you're alone, pay attention to what first seems like silence around you and insist that there is something there. Slowly, you'll notice little textures emerging from the quiet. The whisper of an air purifier, the slight crackle in your lungs, the gaps where someone's words used to go. These are the sounds of death, and once you notice, they become impossible to tune out. You can hardly blame people for trying. Since the burden of public health has been handed off to individuals, and increasingly the right to get sick is held up as a fundamental freedom, any centralized effort to prevent the spread is read as authoritarian overreach. Nowadays, even if the crisis were to get 5 times worse, I see no way politicians could course correct, let alone get people to care again. For the past 18 months, the official situation has been that there is no situation. Where do you go from nowhere?
I think I'm done.
You can make decent money by working to narrow the semantic distance between transition and death, likening the two things, abstractly or concretely, wherever possible. If this was a year ago, I might have said you could make a fortune doing this, but hearing that Graham Linehan's book only sold 400 copies in its first week, it's looking closer to like child support money. Still, the anti-trans movement is heavily preoccupied with any and all complications that can arise from gender transition. They aren't common, but they don't need to be. Tabloids and content aggregators scour the trans internet for any mention of negative experiences, and then they make a public spectacle of whatever they find. Stories of surgery complications circulate widely, alongside stories about regretful detransition, or any transition that's judged to be unsuccessful, usually because the audience doesn't think the person is attractive enough. These stories come together to paint medical transition as a tragedy that leaves its patients forever marked. When the anti-trans movement talks about those of us who've had complications, they place a real emphasis on the permanence of our suffering. This idea that our wounds will never heal, our scars will never fade, that nothing could ever ease the pain of living in such a damaged body. A famous copy pasta that people mention in my comments literally weekly reads, "You will never be a real woman. You are a homosexual man twisted by drugs and surgery into a crude mockery of nature's perfection." It ends by saying, "This is your fate. This is the life you chose. There is no turning back." I talked about this strategy at length in my video Fear of Trans Bodies, but basically it's a way to shame trans people into silence and make everyone else afraid of us. It's pretty blatantly bad faith. But let's set that aside for a second and suppose that everything they say is true. Let's say the scenario proposed by the most rage-blind transphobes is correct, and there are millions of people walking the earth who've been irrevocably scarred from gender transition. What I want to ask today is, then what? What do you want them to do about it? I've been thinking about this a lot lately because some aspects of my own transition have started to cause me a lot of grief, and I don't know how to talk about it. The main framework I have for that kind of suffering is transition regret, which doesn't really tell the full story. I mean, if I had to choose between where I was at 16 and where I am now, oh my god, I'm choosing this every time. Easy. But there's also some new pain that I don't know what to do with. I've been trying to figure out how to honor that feeling without blaming myself for it. How I can acknowledge it and move on with my life. And what I've found, if it wasn't already obvious, is that these narratives don't want me to survive my pain. They make no provision for the fact that sometimes life's a bitch and then you keep living, which I want to do. The prevailing conversations around trans regret don't aim to help the people experiencing it, but to paint transition as a metaphorical death that nothing can revive a person from, not even detransition. Transphobes project onto us a permanent, immutable misery. It makes our suffering predictable and our deaths hardly even count. To them, the defining tragedy has already taken place. Transition is the choice that encloses all future possibilities. It is the last meaningful step before death. I've never taken this perspective that seriously, of course. It's not like I had to unlearn that health complications would ruin my life. But even way on the opposite end of the political spectrum, I've also been guilty of thinking of transition as an ending. And I think this has made my path forward pretty confusing. The start of my transition was brought on by this image I held of my ideal self, this beautiful, liberated woman. I made it my personal project to become her, basically, and had no idea what lay beyond that. I didn't really know what happened to trans women afterwards. I mean, everyone I knew was like 20 years old. The early days offered a clear blueprint, and as long as I followed that blueprint, I think I did okay. Over about 4 years, I did a lot of work on myself. I trained my voice, I took hormones, and I capped it all off with a major surgery. A bunch of other great things coincided with that surgery, which felt meaningful in some way. I almost took it like the universe was doing me a solid for completing my journey or whatever. It was a lot of fun to be around that year, threw some great parties. Then life went on. Events kept occurring, layoffs, variants, etc. And I wasn't sure what those were meant to say about my choices. The following year, I started having these health complications, which on their own would have been frustrating, but when read as a betrayal of this ideal self, or as a divergence from the story I'd been telling myself, they wound up devastating. I kind of did the turf thing and projected a scathing moral judgment onto my health issues. My complications were minor enough that no one except me was super worried, and I had a hard time explaining why they were giving me so much grief. Across a year of journal entries and notes in my phone, the closest I managed to get was things went on too long. It doesn't make sense anymore. Nobody really got it because I didn't get it. At least, not until I watched this weird little movie.
Barber Westchester. Hello.
Joni Phillips' animated film Barber, Westchester tells a story of a young person named Barber who grew up in a doomsday cult run out of their family home, made up entirely of their parents and siblings. The movie rules, folks. It's really funny, it looks like this, and it has one of the sickest soundtracks I've ever heard. The next few things I have to say are technically spoilers, but I don't really think this is the kind of movie to be ruined by spoilers. The movie is free on YouTube though, so you can skip ahead to the timestamp on screen if you want to check it out first. Anyway, Barber finds respite from their awful home life by pursuing their passion for astronomy. It's their singular focus in life. They pick up shifts at the local observatory and watch space videos in their bedroom under cover of night. Eventually, Barber gets offered a job at NASA several towns away, so they leave home to move in with some cool lesbians and start a new life. You love to see it. At this point in the story, you might think you've got the movie figured out. It's a funny, cerebral coming of age with some interesting twists on the formula. But then, on their first day at NASA, Barber's boss breaks some news.
Space isn't real. NASA's a sham. All the space stuff is fake.
What? And what I thought was the entire plot has just been thrown out the window. The driving force in Barber's life, and therefore the movie, has just been obliterated, and Barber is left with no idea how to move on. Have I mentioned this happens 32 minutes into a 90-minute movie? The rest of the movie does not see Barber work to expose NASA's lies, or discover some new passion, or do anything you'd expect in the kind of movie you thought you were watching. Instead, here's a small portion of what happens in the remaining hour. Barber asks a lot of people for advice on how to move forward. They all do their best, but most of the advice is tied up in the specifics of their own lives. Barber pays a visit to their hometown, only to find it's been overtaken by parrots and abandoned. Barber's brother comes out as gay, and they try to be supportive, but don't do a great job. We spend some time on this weird island in Barber's head, trying to process their inscrutable dreams. This entity from the dreams appears in the real world and causes some trouble, then seems to go away. Barber pays a visit to Mayor Ladlesmith, a nice guy who has a separate little guy growing out of the top of his head. The little guy also offers some advice.
You should give up and kill yourself.
A rat approaches Barber to ask if they want their arm back. Oh yeah, their arm fell off at some point. And finally, there's some stuff with puppets. I'm not totally clear on this. I think maybe the entire world is destroyed. Although I'm a big fan of Joni Phillips' other work, I didn't really get Barber Westchester for a long time. While each of these moments worked for me in isolation, I also felt like a bunch of stuff just happened with no underlying motive or nothing to tie it all together. Initially, I took this as the result of weak writing or oversized ambitions. The movie only finally clicked with me when I read this post the director made on Patreon. Barber Westchester is essentially a narrative about a character who's tormented by the narrative, and the resolution of their arc is to disengage from it. A lot of questions get raised that intentionally do not get answered because Barber's story is about disengaging from the questions. I've said before many times that I find a lot of the rules of story structure in animation to be inherently fascistic and conformist. By telling Barber's story, I wanted to do something where the narrative itself is the sort of evil element. I thought back to Milo, who's stuck living a teenager's life because his story ended before his body did. I thought of my great-grandmother, who died in a public care home only a month after the pandemic ended. And of course I thought of myself, having built and scaled a summit, only to then realize I need to find myself a way down. I called up Jonni to talk some more about this, and she told me this movie came out of a conflict with the story she'd been telling herself. Our connection wasn't great, so I only have the audio from this call.
What happened with it was like the structure kind of became this really condensed version of what my life is, you know? Everything about it is sourced from my life in some way. The arc of it is kind of the arc that I had making the movie, really, where it's like starting from this point of like deep just despair and feeling horrible about everything, which is how I felt when I started it in like 2020. Actually, no, 2019 was when I started it. I wanted to make like a horror movie about being alive. That was like where it all started, kind of, was that I felt really, really scared of like everything that was in my life and everything that was happening. I didn't understand anything. And I didn't have any kind of semblance of what my life should be. I was like terrified all the time. All these things that I didn't understand were always happening to me. And so I started from this place of like, okay, so I want to make a movie where I express that feeling of like just being terrified and just super unclear.
Initially, I didn't love the amount of disconnected plot devices in this movie. The whole parrot thing, space being fake, 3 elaborate conspiracies. But there's actually something really truthful about it. In short, Barber is not the center of their universe. Their world is full of independent actors with their own motives, all colliding to create a world far too complex to hold in your head. A movie that aspires to this complexity is necessarily hard to follow at times. I mean, most stories sacrifice at least a little nuance in the name of cohesion. Those stories are great and frankly easier to talk about, but I admire that Barber Westchester can't be boiled down. It has to be experienced. While this movie offers a lot to pick apart, trying to fit a theory of everything onto it would bring you further from the truth, not closer. Under the movie's stylized world and proudly absurd plot twists hides a commitment to this kind of realism I don't think I've ever seen before.
Even if I do make stories for myself or whatever, like I think that assigning a narrative to life is actually really detrimental. Because it's not how the world works, and it's not how reality actually works. The world doesn't have a story. We basically arbitrarily just assign that to it when it's actually just a bunch of random bullshit that's happening. Not in a nihilistic way, but in like a beautiful way, in my opinion. Because again, everything is like an ecosystem. Everything is reacting to everything else that's going on, right? So like I can, lose my job or something, and then someone else gets my job, and then like that affects that. Like, but then also me not having my job makes me go to like the park on like a specific day where I like touch an acorn, and then like, like it's like literally like everything is neutral.
As Barber reels from the loss of their future, all the important things keep happening. They keep showering, calling their mom, watching TV with friends. After some time to adjust, it becomes clear that the collapse of their ambitions isn't the cataclysm it first seemed. It's hard, but that's about it. I talk a lot on this channel about making meaning from nothing, about turning an idea in theoretical physics into my life story, or turning an incurable pain into the will of God. I get a lot out of this process, but as Jonni's body of work reminds me, the search for meaning cuts both ways. Barber has me wondering if having a purpose set me up for devastation. Thinking of transition as an endpoint to arrive at, rather than a new phase of life with its own challenges, I wound up in a situation that, by definition, could only ever deteriorate. After finally arriving at that ideal self, The only thing left to do was drift further and further away from it. I'd kind of thought that once I got transition out of the way, my life would just freeze frame and roll credits. But like, I was 21. Of course not. A full life is such a long and fluctuating thing. There's no way to arrive at a final version of yourself. You will age, your body will change, you will encounter challenges outside your control. These are just facts of life, and maybe it's not sustainable to read any philosophical meaning into them.
I think that choosing to ignore the complexity of everything is actually like detrimental to you in the long run, and like to your relationships, and to like not only just personal but like to the world around you. And like I think you can see this like kind of on like a larger society like way. Like everyone, especially like in the Western world, I feel like is very, very concerned with like their own individual success. And I think it's like literally the reason why everything is the way it is right now, or in like America especially, like where it's like because our society is so based in this like actually like narcissistic kind of way of thinking.
I think I'm a little softer on this than Joni, though I do appreciate her stance. I think feeling like you have a purpose in life, even if it's not true, can help you get to where you need to be. The story Barber told himself about their life, that they become a great astronomer, pushed them to leave a shitty home, and kept them company for years in what was otherwise a pretty miserable situation. The story was only true for like half a day, but it did its job. I think the reason I've been confused is that I've been living in a story that reached its natural endpoint a couple years ago. I've kept trying to act it out, but there's nothing left for me to do here. Thinking about it in those terms, this is kind of a wonderful problem to have. I've come so far from my younger self that what I thought would define my entire life is just a little fraction of me. Sure, there are growing pains, but right now, I feel I have something that everyone deserves. A chance to move on, untethered from any hope of being a certain kind of person, being about what I think I should be about. I can just look around and see what grabs my interest. What happens next, if I'm lucky, is nearly everything. I kind of can't believe I got to talk to Max Graves and Joni Phillips for this video. Not that they're the most famous people on earth, but they're genuinely two of my like creative idols. Their work has been huge for me. I basically made this video to convince more people to check out their shit because I'm constantly recommending it to everyone I know. Since I enjoyed talking to them so much, and since I apparently can't resist giving myself more work, I've decided to make 2 bonus videos for this episode. They're extended cuts of my interviews with Max and with Joni. In these videos, we go deep on what inspires their work, on the issues they find with the stories we tell ourselves, and much more. They were both such cool, insightful conversations that make a solid expansion or companion piece to this video, and you can find them both on Nebula. Nebula, of course, is the creator-owned streaming service that helps make these videos possible. On there, you can find all my videos ad-free, plus the catalogs of some of the absolute best creators in the game. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than YouTube Premium, and the money goes right to us. Nebula helps to fund our edgy, ambitious passion projects, like Maggie Mae Fish's excellent new series on sexuality in film, or Jessie Gender's upcoming sci-fi movie Identities. When you sign up with my link, you can get 40% off an annual membership, and a solid chunk of your subscription money goes like directly to me. So if you're looking to support the channel, it's a great way to do that. Go.nebula.tv/LilyAlexander. You know what to do.
I'm all alone in the world, blowing like a leaf in the currents of random change. I see only what's in front of me. I'm in a hurry, always falling behind. Well, that was close. Higher and higher, try to climb, but solid when I fall and look around.